All right.
All right, I think we're officially live here now on YouTube, having to do YouTube again. We're going to try to move this thing around and, do some different things as far as putting it on Facebook as well and putting it on some other platforms. But appears that right now, at least, I don't necessarily know how to get it on Facebook as easily as we got it on YouTube. So we'll stick with YouTube for now. Chris, I've got to send out by the way, we got a lot to talk about today, actually. I've got to send out the links and everything right now. So while I do that, Chris, do you want to tell everybody a bit about, and again, we're coming at you live on Gamecock Central. I'm Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark. While I send out the links, Chris, do you want to tell everybody a bit about the commitment of Nick Barrett and coming in late last night? First of all, what were you doing when Nick Barrett committed? Because I was literally almost passed out of sleep and my phone started buzzing. I wasn't going to look at it. Then it buzzed again. And I was like, well, maybe I need to check on this. And ended up being the commitment of Nick Barrett.
So I was a little ahead of you. I was all the way asleep instead of just almost passed out. Had an earlier start yesterday, and past couple nights gone to bed a little bit earlier, to be honest with you. So yeah, I was out. What was it? It was about 10:30, I think, or something like that, somewhere around there. And so I was full passed out, and woke up this morning and saw it. But that's why we have a team at Gamecock Central, and Colin and Wes and everybody else is able to handle that, which I appreciate. But yeah, I mean, Barrett is an intriguing commitment for South Carolina. It's just another example how recruiting's not really stopped. I mean, it's different prospects have handled it different ways. It's affected different schools in different ways. For South Carolina, they've seen some of both. I mean, they've had 2 decommitments in this class already. One was last year. One was during this recruiting shutdown. And they picked up a couple now since the shutdown. And this is the latest one. Barrett's a kid from North Carolina that the staff identified last year, really. They've been on him a little while. He visited for the Clemson game late November and then was offered officially in mid-December last year. Kyle Krantz, Carolina's special teams coordinator and assistant secondary coach, was in on him. He's got that part of North Carolina. He's from Eastern North Carolina and Goldsboro, which is really out there. You sort of, you have to be going there to get there. I've never been, but I know some people that have been and been told by some folks that it's sort of out there. And, it's not, for example, in Charlotte where I'm going to go to Charlotte today and hit 10 schools. It's not how it really works. So, but they did identify him pretty early. And since then he's picked up, several other offers. Penn State, Virginia, Ole Miss, a few others offered Barrett. He's a big 6'3", 320-pound guy with some athleticism. And, got him in for the Clemson game last year, like I said, and then had another visit in January, before things got shut down, a junior day trip that I think really helped put things over the top for South Carolina. And, it just so happened that maybe Carolina benefited from the shutdown here. Barrett didn't, there are no other spring visits for him. No other, projected visits this summer. Summer camps are sort of, at least at some places, are not happening. At others, they're probably not happening. And so it's a deal where he knew where he wanted to go and went ahead and shut it down in favor of the Gamecocks.
Yeah, and, I think, Chris, put South Carolina in a position, I believe, to sign another really strong defensive line class if we want to talk big picture now. The first defensive line commitment officially, but I think really just gets the ball rolling for them here. I think you look at his you look at the body type, and he's someone who I think is like a true like nose tackle type. 320 pounds, can hold up inside. Then I start to look at a Tyrion Ingram Dawkins there and Gaffney, who I think South Carolina is in pretty good shape with. You look at TJ Sanders from Marion, who, those we talked to just think he is a freak athlete, and another guy, maybe that has some versatility, which we've seen South Carolina sign guys on the defensive front that do have that type of versatility. I think you start talking about the possibility of those guys, and then maybe adding, an edge rusher or two on top of that. We're projecting a little bit, but I think this is a good start. Like you said, really, I went back and looked. They offered Nick in mid-December, but ever since they offered, this is one of the guys we've consistently heard has been one of their top priorities at defensive tackle. Not really, sometimes you offer a kid and you're sort of hanging in there, but you're not pushing. Impression we've got from all of our people was that this is someone that's been a priority, a guy they really wanted. And I think just sets up very nicely as the first domino for South Carolina in this potential defensive line class.
For sure. And, I think you hit on it. Priority guy from the get-go. Certainly not someone that they're reaching on at this point. In early commitment, I think you can feel pretty good about, because this is a guy that I think South Carolina would have gone the distance for. And so to pick him up under these circumstances here in April is certainly a positive. And you hit on a lot of the other names there. South Carolina is going to be looking for some edge rushers. One of them in-state committed to Florida, and Justice Boone's a guy that they're still, keeping in communication with. There's, I don't know what, 5 or 6, way more than 5 or 6 guys, but 5 or 6 maybe legitimate guys there when you talk about an edge or maybe a buck position. And then you look at your in types and some of your interior guys with, like you said, Ingram, Dawkins, and Sanders and Nick Barrett. It's always a good thing. And the Carolinas typically has defensive line talent, but when you've got, 4 or 5 defensive linemen in North and South Carolina that you feel are good enough to play on your roster and help continue to upgrade your roster, that's always a positive thing. From there, it's just about going and getting them. And so, South Carolina, not to get ahead of ourselves, but they're going to have an opportunity, at least, I think we can say that, to sort of sweep the in-state guys. Maybe not Boone, but we'll just have to see in a variety of ways how that one goes. But they've got a legitimate shot to pull, TJ Sanders and Ingram Dawkins out of the state of South Carolina. Then you look up to North Carolina, they got Barrett, and there's some other guys in that state. I mean, Javari Ritzie comes to mind. They're in a battle with him, with North Carolina and a bunch of others, and probably need Ritzie to wait things out if you're South Carolina. But they got a chance, like you said, Wes, to stack another good defensive line group, which has really been an area of strength, right? When you look at, if you could pick out one area and say, where has South Carolina recruited and developed the best over Will Muschamp's tenure, you probably got to be that front, right? I mean, when you look at some star guys like Javon Kinlaw and his development into a first-round probable pick later this month, even to the depth guys, they've sort of built that up and they've stacked some talent at that position.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And this is something we've tried to do before, and we tested this earlier, maybe a couple of weeks ago. Didn't work perfectly, but I believe I've tweaked some settings here, Chris, to where we're going to be able to share my screen and actually watch some video. So if you want to, I know we talked about them a little bit, but I'm going to share. This is Nick Barrett's highlights right now, is what you should be seeing.
Yep.
Are you seeing them, Chris?
Yep, I got them. Little jumpy-ish right now. It's getting better as time goes on. Yep.
Yeah, should be optimized for video now, which was our issue before. It was very choppy because I think it was more for like still graphics and photos and stuff like that. This should be optimized for video, but I think the thing, first of all, that stands out about Nick, dude, other than the size, once you see him play here, is how productive he was. And obviously we're having a little freezing up issue. I'm just going to run it back since that's hopefully buffered. But the dude had, I think, 70 something tackles and like 15 or 16 sacks. For someone his size, Chris, that's you just don't see that very often from an interior player, maybe an edge guy or a linebacker, someone who has the opportunity to play all over the field. But to be able to be that productive from a kid that size is just you don't see that very often.
Yeah, and just eyeballing him on tape and seeing his size and sort of the profile, the skill set. You mentioned how he could be a a true nose type, I could certainly see that, a shade or, but maybe even could be a guy that could be versatile enough to play some, interior sort of a three technique pass rushing type. When I look at him, he looks like you said, he looks like a guy that can be that shade type, that nose type, occupy blocks. But he does have some pass rush pop, based on numbers and based on looking at his tape. He moves well. You look at the build, he's got a big lower body. Um, the arms, I mean, he's got the ability to push the pocket. That's so important nowadays, when you're talking about your interior pass rush, because a lot of teams are going to really hone in on edge rushers and they're going to try to do things schematically, to account for those guys and take them away. You want it everywhere, but it really becomes a game changer for you when you have a guy that's that disruptive on the interior. We saw it this season with Javon Kinlaw, with what he could do. You talk about his ability to get off blocks in the run game and just cause havoc, eat up double teams if he was double teamed, or pass rush. I mean, Javon Kinlaw made some plays that resulted in interceptions for Carolina this year. Pushed the pocket, had pass rush. So, not saying Nick Barrett's going to be Kinlaw. If he could be 3/4 of the player, that would really be something for Carolina. But there's a lot here to work with. You can see in terms of the size and skill set. There's a lot there that you can't teach, and I think that's what you look for in a tackle.
Yeah, and I think probably fits right in, Chris, with what we've seen South Carolina land really the last couple of classes. I think you look at that position. I mean, really every position, but that position in particular, I look at defensive line, offensive line as positions where you have to continuously stack.
Yep.
And that means a handful of good players one year, handful of good players the next year. It never really stops. You're never, you're never satisfied with where you are on the defensive line. And this is a kid that, and some of them are going to be ready year one, and some of them are going to be ready 2 or 3 years down the line. And you have to have enough talent, enough guys in theory on your campus already. That the guys that are ready to play, the guys that aren't have some time to develop. And, this is a kid I think also worth mentioning the first win for Tracy Rocker as defensive line coach. Now, I think South Carolina, like you said earlier, was already in pretty good position with the kid. He, for whatever reason, sometimes we see it all the time. Sometimes kids just click at a particular school. And it's felt to me like he just sort of clicked at South Carolina. You go back to that junior day. Was it early February? I was going back through the articles that we had written about him. There was an article where, the title was South Carolina zeroing in on Nick Barrett. And I think early on, South Carolina it just felt like that was going to be they were going to be a long-term factor for him and maybe the favorite for him. John Scott Jr. was, of course, the defensive line coach at the time. He leaves. You sort of wonder, all right, is this going to affect his recruitment or not? And obviously it didn't. I think the fact that Muschamp was, heavily involved there, and Kyle Krantz gets a big win in the state of North Carolina. I think he's a guy that doesn't get talked about, much as far as the big name guys on the staff, but I think deserves credit for going into North Carolina, like you said, an area that's not heavily populated, but they found a guy, they evaluated, they moved in, and then they land him. I think a good get in that sense all the way around. And I know we're supposed to talk to Nick at some point. Have you chatted with him yet since the commitment?
Not yet. No, we haven't connected yet. I think probably, I mean, right now it's 2:30. I don't know what his virtual school situation is, but I touched base with him this morning. And, he said we could chat later today. So it might be that he doesn't, quote unquote, get out of school until later today, but I'm not really sure what the situation is with that. But we are scheduled to speak at some point today here on Thursday, hoping to.
I got you. We got a couple of questions on our YouTube. Garrett Martin asking if he's committed. Yes, Nick Barrett, the kid you were seeing, he did commit to South Carolina last night, actually late last night. And not really a surprise that he committed to South Carolina. Maybe a bit of a surprise that he committed, at 10:30 at night or whatever time it was. Bruce Fiddle listening in. He says, I feel like linebackers are a priority for South Carolina in this class. I think that's a position. Personally, I think linebacker has been a bit devalued in today's game, maybe compared to your defensive front and your cornerbacks at least. But yeah, I think that's always a priority. That's a position, Chris. I almost get the feeling with South Carolina and the fan base and even the media to an extent, linebacker feels like a spot where South Carolina hasn't really they haven't landed like the high 4-star type guys at that position, like maybe they have at corner or on the defensive front. But if you look at last year, to me, I thought South Carolina's linebacker play was pretty solid, and I think they added another really good piece in like a Mo Kaba this past year, and we'll see what they can do. Off the top of your head, maybe for Bruce, who are a couple of the guys you feel like to watch at linebacker for this class?
I'd definitely say, Trinilius Tatum out of Georgia, is a guy, he's a 4-star guy out of Georgia that, South Carolina has really been pushing for, and I think have a shot with. They've consistently been in the lead groups that Tatum has named out of the Peach State, and don't have a sense right now if maybe South Carolina's the leader or not, but certainly he's a guy that they're going to have a solid shot with going forward. Ra Dilworth out of North Carolina is a guy that I think they're behind for right now. I think Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina are probably ahead right now, but that one he was going to, commit in April or May, and that one has gotten pushed back. So maybe that's a positive for South Carolina. If he continues on that path, and if they can go play some ball, win some games, maybe you get back in there. Bryce Steele out of Virginia is definitely one to watch. He's a guy that's athletically really impressive. We saw him in camp, I think it was last summer, and 3-star guy out of Virginia that looks like either a big safety or an outside linebacker type. He can really run. He's got a frame that can add more weight, good length, and so he's someone that they identified pretty early that they're battling North Carolina for, and probably going to stand a pretty good shot with him as well. Greg Penn, a 4-star guy out of Maryland, from DeMatha, actually knows Marshawn Lloyd, is another one to watch. Jabril McNeil, who could be a linebacker or be an edge guy out of the state of North Carolina. Raleigh as well is another one to keep an eye on, I think. So probably about 5 guys there that I think are probably closely worth monitoring, and some more probably on the list as well.
Yeah, and guys normally this time of the year would pop up. This would be about the time that high school programs are going through some type of spring practice, and then you'd have the spring evaluation period, and this would be a very busy time for not just South Carolina but really all major programs as they're going around and seeing guys in person. Spring and then summer with camps is generally a big time for new offers to go out, and I think you have, if you're a staff, you sort of have your no-brainer types that have already gotten offers, and then you have your guys over here that you like, but you're sort of saying, I need to check off 1 or 2 more boxes. Is it size that you want to verify? Is it speed, in the 40 that you want to verify in camp? Is it that you want to see how this guy competes in practice? You want to see if he, has the right attitude at practice. There's all these different things that you're maybe waiting to see. And now I think that gets, I don't think it's obvious it gets taken away from you, but I think the interesting thing, the part of the discussion is, do teams, Chris, and prospects themselves, do you wait and offer the guy maybe during their senior season? Or do you go to the other side of it and say, we're going to go ahead and offer even if we're unsure? And I think that's something we've seen with South Carolina and with other schools. I imagine the guys that you just maybe have a little bit of a question about, you maybe lean towards, and it depends on this isn't in a vacuum. It depends on the rest of your board as well, and how it all fits together. It's a big puzzle, but I think that's an interesting piece of all this is, do schools go ahead and deliver offers now, or do they decide to wait on kids?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think you're going to see some of both. Probably we already have seen some of both, I would say. But here's the thing: a lot of these guys are already going to be established with, right? And so you've got your board. A lot of the board's set, and it may shift a little, but a lot of the priority guys are priority guys until they're not, which means they're either committed or they're off the board, to somewhere else. Maybe continue pursuing some of those, but the board will, get shaken out one way or another. I think with seniors, with guys from the 21 class, would there be some pop up at camp? Probably so. We've seen it every single cycle. I mean, even going back to last year, Joey Hunter, he wasn't a guy that, South Carolina had offered. They knew about him out of the state of Georgia, but he got to camp, had a really good camp. He tested well, and South Carolina offered him, and immediately became a major program to watch. Now, if there wasn't a camp session, would that have happened? Maybe not. And so now maybe other things would have happened. Maybe South Carolina would have continued learning more about him in some form or fashion. Because remember, this is after the spring evaluation period. There's no spring evaluation period this year. Normally, coaches have 2 evaluation visits to school, and then you got summer camp, and they don't have any of that. And so they are going off far less information. So does it mean maybe a fewer offers? Does it mean a few guys that you're not quite sure about get offers? Maybe. But you also, recruiting's so far out now that most of the guys, I think, are going to be established as priorities, but you won't have maybe quite as much board shifting with some late offers. I think that's pretty fair to say. And that's at South Carolina, and that's at some other places too.
Yeah, one guy that South Carolina did decide to go ahead and offer, being J.J. Jones from Myrtle Beach. And, we've started to see, I think for the most part, we have a pretty good idea of the major players for this class of 2021 in-state, as far as guys that already have offers, guys that are on the border, of getting an offer. And then we've started, I think, to get a feel for at least part of the major players in state for 2022. We obviously saw South Carolina extend the offer to Jaden Lucas, the cornerback from Malden here recently. That class, I believe, especially with no spring and no camp, that class may be the one that's a little more affected by this, just as far as the timing. I mean, the offers will get, if you're a player, you're going to get the offer, eventually. I think maybe just some things get pushed back to junior season on the field, maybe for a guy that would have been offered this spring or this summer for that class. But a little bit of a unique situation with South Carolina and J.J. Jones. They did offer him over the weekend. Someone they've been familiar with was obviously Luke Doty's top receiver target at Myrtle Beach. And Chris, you sort of got the impression that they really like J.J. Jones, like the film. I think really like him as a person is the other part of that. Really conscientious, hardworking, just comes across as a really sharp kid. I think they liked everything about J.J. Jones, but it was one of those things where you're trying to maybe check that final box. And, I think he probably would have gotten an offer this spring anyway if there would have been a spring eval period. But they finally that's an example of one where, especially if you look at the other offers that he had coming in, they did all they could from a remote evaluation standpoint. They did have him in for a junior day. They told him, they tried to be honest and open with him that they were continuing to evaluate him. And then they do offer this past weekend. I personally think it's a good offer. We've got him as like a mid 3-star guy there on Rivals. I think that he's got some potential to move up. The guy is, if you stacked up just the offer lists in the state for 2021, I got to think he may have, does he have the best offer list in state as far as the number of FBSs? Tyrion Ingram Dawkins has a nice one going. Justice Boone had a really nice early list of major players, like major schools. I think Justice really probably maybe wasn't talking to some lesser schools, so they just didn't even like mess with offering him. But
Right.
maybe in pure numbers, I mean, Justice had a really nice list as far as quality of programs coming after him, and now he, of course, is committed to Florida. But Robbie Utes has a nice little list, but man, JJ Jones has accumulated quite an offer
Yeah.
list with South Carolina now hopping on board.
Yeah. Couldn't say for sure without going through and trying to count them up between him and Ingram Dawkins, who would have the bigger one. But it'd have to be one of those two, I would think. And Jones is a guy that, I think if you look at him on tape, he's got good tape. I think it's probably just, with a lot of receivers, you do want to see him in person. You want to maybe see how they test. What's the 40 look like? What's the vertical? What's the coachability? How do they run routes in person? You get a better sense of that. Coachability. A lot of the other points that you'd have for other position groups, but some factors for receivers are going to be obviously more important than at other spots. And so, they, again, this is unique circumstances, no spring eval period, no summer camps, as we mentioned. And so you go off what you can go off. And, they had enough information at this point to go ahead and pull the trigger. So that is an example of one that, maybe if the circumstances are normal, maybe they do wait. Like you said, Wes, it might have happened during the spring eval period anyway. It may have not even taken until summer camp. It might have come. But so we'll never really know that. But now they have offered. And I think South Carolina is going to be a player here. Not saying you're going to land him, but he does have a big offer list. But I think South Carolina is certainly going to be have a seat at the table going forward in this recruitment.
Yeah, and everything I've heard is that as an offer he really wanted. Like you said, we'll see how it plays out. I do think he will continue to consider some other schools as well, but we do know that this is an offer that was important to him. The Luke Doty factor there, like I said, he was Luke's top target this past season, and the two of them are friends. They talk quite a bit, I think, about recruiting, and the people I talked to in Myrtle Beach say that this was a massive offer for JJ. Nobody's saying that he's a lock to South Carolina, but definitely someone that, or they are definitely a school that is high on his list. I think is safe to say. And I think he'd be a good pickup for them, man. I think there was a sense, Chris, we talked, all off season about the need to add speed in this class. And that has been a priority for South Carolina when it comes to playmakers, specifically wide receiver. And I think they've gotten caught a bit. If you look at some of the guys on the roster at landing some sort of 6'3", 6'4" type guys that did not maybe have the necessary speed to sort of separate out, from coverage, or at least take the top off of a defense. So I think that's been a priority for South Carolina in this class. We know that is to add speed, but I get the feeling that maybe hurt JJ a little bit early on as far as the pursuit of an offer, just because he's not that speed, not that he's slow, he's not that speed receiver type. And I think that's something they probably wanted to evaluate a bit more, is just to see. But I was trying to put the film on. It's very choppy right now. I wanted people to be able to see it, but I'll rewatch the film when they offer. Dude, I think it's a very good film. He's a guy who's got good ball skills. He runs pretty good routes for sort of a long stride type kid. Like I said, he may be like a good laid back kid off the field, but he plays with a tenacity on the field, and has sort of that edge that you want your guys to play with, especially sometimes you don't have that with wide receivers. Sometimes that is a finesse position with some kids. I think he plays wide receiver pissed off, basically, which is something that I think in this league you like to see. So watching, I'm going to try to get it pulled up one more time where you're talking. But what did you? To me, it's a smart offer, and I think he's someone that if they get him, I think he helps South Carolina relatively early in his career. I think this would end up being a really nice get for him, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think some of the points you hit on were the same things that I saw on the tape. I mean, you look at where South Carolina is on a roster, and some people are going to disagree with me at receiver. They maybe haven't recruited quite as bad as it has looked like. Last year it looked really bad, and I think there were a few reasons for that. Number one, I mean, you get into a lot of the inconsistency of the offense overall and the quarterback play and the injuries. But last year when you look at on paper and you go, man, this should be better than it is. But they had some guys really struggle last year. You had a sophomore slump, and with Josh Vann, you had one guy coming along and Xavier Legette, who never played the position before. So it might be, Wes, that we get, even though they're losing Brian Edwards and just lost Debo Samuel the year before that, it might be that it turns out South Carolina has recruited a little bit better there than we thought, but they still do need a talent upgrade there. And we've seen that with the speed that you mentioned. They've gone out and offered more speed guys in this class because they need that. So JJ Jones, when you're digging into his film here, he's not going to be that run past you guy. You don't have to be that to be a quality receiver. With a guy like him at his size, it's more about that competitive edge. Can he, if he's not going to blow past guys and he's not going to maybe get as much separation as like a Shy Smith, for example, who can just run past a guy, can he catch the ball like right here in tight quarters? Can he compete for the ball in the air? Can he use his body? Can he block on the perimeter? I'm sure that there's going to be some teaching points to refine his route running. I'm sure he'll work on the speed and all those things. But for him, it's going to be much more about just scheming him open, him being a smart, good route running receiver. And then he's got good hands. He's good in the open field. He's competitive. I think that's going to be more of his bag than having him running, slot fades, for example, against people. That's not going to be as much of his game.
Yeah, and as is proven time and time again, as much as we do talk about the speed and how South Carolina needs that upgrade, you don't have to be a burner to be a guy that has a knack for getting open. And I think that's really the hardest part of the evaluation process, probably for evaluating wide receivers, is this guy going to be able to get open and separate at the next level? And I'm not talking about JJ. I'm talking about just in general with bigger receivers. And
Right.
I think, Chris, we see it all the time. We see 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" receivers who have really good film in high school and get to the next level and just can't get open and can't make plays. And then you see 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" receivers at the high school level, maybe with similar film, and they get to the next level, and that knack for getting open just sort of translates. It's kind of hard to put into words, and it's probably hard to sort of evaluate on film. Is this going to transfer over to the next level? And some of the best receivers in the history of the game weren't going to hop on the stopwatch and be a 4-4, or 4-5 guy even, but they just had a knack for getting in and out of their breaks and using sort of finesse to get themselves open. The funny, like, for example, Alshon Jeffrey, I think that was one thing people questioned when he was in high school was, the speed. They saw this sort of, Alshon, when he runs, he looks like he's lumbering,
Right.
Sidney Rice, who, for my money is still one of the top 2 or 3 receivers in school history, just on his ability to get open and make plays. He's not a burner by any means, and he had long strides, but he still had a knack for getting open and a knack for going and making plays on the ball and in small spaces. So it's kind of hard to just look at a guy on film and figure out which way is he going to go, because a lot of times, Chris, to me, it seems like sometimes it's like all or nothing, and you maybe just don't know which way is this guy going to go until you get him on your campus and maybe see him against, some college DBs, and that's where the the beauty of maybe seeing some one-on-one camp time and putting them up against another top cornerback is a big part of the eval process.
Yeah, and I think, there are some receivers that you turn on the tape and it would be a shock if they didn't turn out to be, really good players in college, because you can just see
It's just obvious. Yeah.
it's obvious, or even you watch them in college and you just, like you take a guy who's not, a 6'4", you take CD Lamb from Oklahoma. I mean, the guy, his ability in the open field is special. So you want to ideally, you want your receiver to have some kind of special trait, and competitive edge can be one of those, really.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at like Sidney Rice, now he ran 4.53, I think, at the combine. I'm trying to look at some of his older numbers. He was 4.53. His vertical leap was 39.5 inches. So that's something that stood out with Sidney. We knew from his time at Gaffney, he was an awesome basketball player. And so he had great ability in the air. His ability to compete for balls, his vertical leap was outstanding. And so it didn't matter. People had some of these questions about Sidney coming out. Can he separate from people? Well, yeah, he can, because they'll just jump over him. That was sort of the answer for him. And his ball skills are off the charts. He can make some catches, that you just don't see very often. They're sort of rare. And so the fact that he wasn't a 4.4 guy, or wasn't just going to blow past people, or didn't have electric open field ability, that didn't matter as much, because he had great ball skills and leaping ability. So other guys are going to be, 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, but they're electric in terms of route running, quickness, stop, start. So if you got somewhere in between, you just look at their traits. And then you look at sort of the canvas, because these guys aren't going to be, not all of them at least, are going to be ready-made. Some guys are more developmental. There are certain players, whether it's receiver, like you could watch Jadeveon Clowney's high school tape and go, he's probably going to be good. That was obvious. Can you go and evaluate a guy that's maybe not a complete no-brainer? If you can sign 20 no-brainers in your class, and you're going to be really good, but most people don't do that. Even the teams that have been elite lately have been a mix of no-brainer guys, and then going out and evaluating some guys quite well, developing them, and then those guys have turned into contributors on some of these really good football teams.
Yeah, no doubt. And, as we were talking, people obviously saw that I was rewinding these couple of plays here. I think you see a lot, Chris, just in these couple of plays that are here in a row. For a bigger receiver, you see this first one, you sort of see the deep ball ability, laying out for the ball, making a play on the ball, then coming right back this next play. I think you got to look at the feet of these bigger guys. Can they move their feet? Can they make people miss? Obviously, all this, you see the physicality at the end of this run reminds you a little bit of the way Brian Edwards played his senior year at Carolina, just running pissed off, like I said. And then anytime I see a bigger receiver play, the punt return role, that tells me that the coaches believe he has, because I think to be a good punt returner, it's not necessarily about top line speed, which I think is a big part of being a kick returner. To be a punt returner and make people miss in short space, you got to have quickness, you got to have good feet. Obviously, you got to have some pretty good ball skills as well. But you see him break off these comeback routes out on the edge, and that takes a certain amount of precision with your route running to sort of get open on these type of routes. So I think there's a lot to like. You brought up basketball. Whenever a kid's a really good basketball player, that tends to translate to wide receiver as well. And JJ is a kid. I haven't seen him play basketball. We've started watching some of these guys play basketball lately, and it's been sort of fun to watch how it translates to that game. Haven't been able to watch JJ, but I know that Myrtle Beach basketball team, I believe, made it to the state championship. I know they went far in the playoffs. So the kid's got a basketball background as well. So I think that helps. So yeah, we'll see, man. We'll see if South Carolina can land him. We'll see how he turns out, but really good offer for them. I think South Carolina was his 33rd offer, and I think he's maybe gotten 2 since then. So I believe he's at 35. I think Tyrion's maybe into the mid to upper 20s. But I don't know if that counts like smaller schools and all that stuff as well. So we'll see. We'll be continuing to track JJ and all those guys on Gamecock Central. A little bit of other news today, not really a huge surprise, but Chris Lavoisier Carroll to Georgia, Michael Morris to Georgia yesterday or the day before. I don't know. It's all run together. But this week, Georgia landing a couple of South Carolina targets, but also, Chris, guys that I think the writing had sort of been on the wall, maybe with both those guys, at least as far as South Carolina is concerned. I know I think at one point Florida was kind of strong with Lavoisier. Obviously, he's a former Gamecock commit, but at least from our perspective, sort of following them from the South Carolina side, I don't think either one of them, were guys that we were sliding to Carolina. Although I just took a bad L on my future cast because I still had the Gamecocks predicted from when he committed last time with Lavoisier. But
yes,
anyway, yeah, not a huge surprise, I don't think.
No, I mean, and that was the only thing with Carroll is that, he had named Florida as his leader publicly a couple times recently. But, he was someone that should have been already on South Carolina's campus for an official, had one slated for earlier this month. And of course that got pushed off. And then Georgia sort of swooped in. And again, like you said, Wes, not a guy that we would have slotted again to South Carolina, but they had worked their way back in the mix, a little bit and had an official visit on the books. But they got several other targets at the running back position, that are still on board that have some talent as well. Michael Morris is someone that's been to South Carolina a bunch of times. I mean, shoot, I don't 6, 7, 8 times maybe. Carolina was his very first, I think, offer, at least his first major offer. But again, Georgia for an in-state guy like him was really strong. Alabama was strong too. Auburn. And I think the in-state pool there was sort of too strong, and you're going to find that sometimes with some Georgia kids.
Yeah, Georgia, a Georgia offer for a Georgia kid means a lot. So I think that was certainly the case here. And one of the situations where maybe the shutdown and everything affects South Carolina. We've actually seen them have some positive outcomes with the shutdown and everything to recruiting. This is maybe a situation where it did sort of affect them negatively. Like you said, he would have been on campus last week for the spring game, and obviously was not able to do that. But you mentioned Michael Morris, him committing to Georgia. That this O-line class is going to be very interesting, Chris, as we've talked about before. Not going to be as big of a class as we've seen previously, where South Carolina's landed 4, 5, 6 guys even. I think an interesting guy to maybe chat about real quick is Dylan Fairchild, who we know and reported last summer. Eric Wolford has this kid come in that's a defensive line prospect and says, I'm not going to do my Eric Wolford impersonation. Although I should. But he comes in and says, you're an offensive lineman. And so he works him out at O-line, really likes him. It offered him that day, I think, maybe.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, so yeah, he offers him. And, I mean, recently, this guy has absolutely blown up. I know Chad Simmons had an update with him. Might be hard to tell where Dylan is leaning right now, but do you have a sense for maybe the players to watch with this guy, that the major players as sort of Dylan is trying to sort through all these big offers he has now?
It's probably got to be frustrating for Eric Wolford. He does, when you look at his sort of track record, he gets in early on a lot of guys that end up like blowing up. Like a guy from 2022, Julian Armella, is one of the first 5 stars on Rivals for next year's class. He was like the second school to offer Julian Armella. Now he's got 30, probably. And Michael Morris was one that we just mentioned. Dylan Fairchild was one. And you're right. He plucked him over on the offensive line and offered him. And Carolina did get a good foot in the door and a good sort of head start there with Dylan and his family. He's, since that summer visit, had been on campus again, I think, for a game, and then was back, I think, for another junior day visit with his mom. And so, Georgia's gotten in the mix, and Georgia's a major player for sure. Now, I think there are several SEC schools around the Southeast that are in the mix, but Georgia's definitely a big one. Um, I would say Georgia and South Carolina are probably, if I had to guess, the main two to watch, but there's some others in there too from the SEC. He's a really good wrestler as well, great competitor, great kid. And so I think it's going to be one to watch. This summer was probably this spring, this summer was probably going to be pretty significant for him in terms of visits, and now that can't happen. So it'd be really interesting to watch it play out. But South Carolina's O-line slots are pretty limited this year. It's going to be a small class, as we've said. But Fairchild's certainly one that they wanted, and we'll just have to see how it plays out there.
Yeah, no doubt, man. We'll see. I'm trying to think if we're missing anybody. I know they're still sending offers out right now. Obviously, some of those offers, it's sort of hard to tell right off the bat. Hey, is this a guy to track very closely, or is this a guy that maybe you put in your back pocket and sort of wait until later on as far as South Carolina's chances? But like I said earlier, they did offer Jaden Lucas from Malden, in-state guy for 2022. They've now got a handful of offers out, out to 2022 guys in state, him being the latest. Chris, I know you talked to him, I guess, and did an article. I think that was this week. Do you have what were your impressions from talking to him? Do you have a feel for the schools that are most involved right there right now?
Yeah, I mean, he's another that's started picking up a lot of offers, and yeah, I think really he's only been to 3 schools. And this spring and this summer again would be pretty big for him. He was going to go take a bunch of other visits, and hasn't happened so far. But he's only been to South Carolina and Clemson and Virginia Tech. And 2 of those 3 have offered. Clemson hasn't offered. And you ask, maybe you go, well, why haven't they offered? Clemson hasn't offered any sophomores yet. They haven't offered a single prospect from the 22 class. Sort of a policy that they go by. Sometimes they tell guys, hey, you're going to get an offer, but that hasn't happened yet. And Clemson, I would guess, will offer when the time is right, when they deem is appropriate. And Clemson will definitely be a big player because they've been involved for a while. They've had him on campus. South Carolina's had him on campus, I think, 3 or 4 times as well. He likes the coaching staff. And Lucas is a guy that really sounds like he wants to stay pretty close to home, at least on somewhere around home. And sort of his exact quote to me was, schools on the East Coast, are good, and in-state would be nice. And so I think South Carolina will have, a seat at the table there. But, Florida got in, and I think he'll go visit there and probably go see a bunch of schools before it's all said and done. And there's obviously a ways to go. But I think this will be one, I think, that ends up being more of a fight that has Clemson and Carolina in it, right? Sometimes we don't see a lot of head-to-heads between those two. There are some, and there are some in which Clemson and South Carolina are maybe one of 4 or 5 or so. But a lot of them, one school ends up separating above the other at some point or another, or they're just in on some different prospects. That South Carolina is maybe in on some guys that Clemson hadn't offered, or Clemson's in on some guys from a national perspective that South Carolina, it doesn't have traction with, or they don't offer, or they don't pursue. And believe it or not, some people may say that this can't be based on the on-field results, but South Carolina doesn't offer everybody Clemson does either. So, but this is one, Wes, that I think there is going to be some carryover with Lucas. And I think it was a timely offer for South Carolina because I think they needed to offer right here, because you got a Clemson offer looming in the future. They'll be a major factor in some of the other schools that already offered as well. But this is a kid who's really intriguing, as a corner prospect.
Yeah, and I believe by my count, is it 4 in-state offers for 2022? I've got Jaleel Skinner, Jaden Lucas, EJ Evett there in Seneca, and CJ Stokes at Hammond.
Yep.
I think that's the list.
Yeah, those are the ones, and Luke, and you said Lucas, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
There's a couple others, that you can look out for with, Jalen Sneed out of Hilton Head is an impressive linebacker.
Up right now.
Yeah, I mean, Florida just jumped in, Tennessee, South Carolina knows about him. Oklahoma, you're right. Yep, there's a big one, and so South Carolina, I would imagine, will at some point. And Adam Randall from Myrtle Beach, the wide receiver,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Teammate of JJ Jones down there is another guy to watch in state. So it's another group that has a chance. There's an offensive lineman from Chapin named Chase Swigert that I think is going to have a chance to be a guy, at some point as well.
Definitely. And finally, we got to tell everybody, Chris, about our little project on Gamecock Central, and that's our Patrick Davis concert on Saturday at 8 o'clock. Chris, are you a Patrick Davis fan?
I am a Patrick Davis fan. I'm a fan of him as a musician and as a person. He's a good dude.
He is a very good dude, man, and
Yep.
I've really sort of been able to see that the last I guess year or so. I've always been a fan of him as far as what he does music wise, but sort of getting to know him a little bit, and we promoted his concert this past Christmas as well, and enjoyed getting to know him then. And so we've partnered up, and Gamecock Central is going to, for the first time ever, present a concert. This is an Almost Williams-Brice Saturday night. I know that people have nothing to do Saturday night anyway, Chris, so they might as well join us. The concert is at 8 o'clock on Saturday. It is on the stageit.com platform. And from what I understand, it's sort of pay what you can. The suggested payment for a ticket is $10, but what we're going to do is we're going to turn around. We have it set as a fundraiser, and I believe StageIt takes just like GoFundMe. They don't operate for free, so they're going to take a little percentage, I'm sure, off the top and for hosting the concert. But we're going to turn around and take all the money for the tickets and give that to the Feed Our Heroes Foundation, which is the foundation that Coach Muschamp and his wife Carol started, within the last week or so, and they're feeding the nurses and doctors who are on the front lines of the COVID-19 fight here in Columbia. There was a really cool video that Gamecock football put out of Coach and Carol going and taking Marco's Pizza to one of the local hospitals, and so we're going to try to get involved in that. Again, I think you can get in for as little as 10 cents. We're not, and anybody that's lost their job due to COVID, we're not trying to make money off of you. We're not trying to make money off of any of you because it's going to the foundation. But if anybody who legitimately can't spend extra money right now wants to watch the concert, just shoot me a DM on Twitter or shoot me a DM on the site, and we'll get you in. But the whole point of it is for everybody to have a chance to hang out on Saturday night and to let Patrick play some songs for us. I think he's going to maybe do some of his Gamecock songs, maybe do some covers, maybe take some requests and do some of his own originals as well. And we'll all have maybe have a drink or two and have a good time, and hopefully we can raise some money for Coach Muschamp's foundation. And hopefully we'll have a big group, man. So Chris, are you going to be in attendance for our virtual concert?
I will be there. Yes, I will be probably on my couch or some other avenue checking it out. I look forward to it, and I wonder if we'll be able to. I have to send in a request list to Patrick. He has quite an array of material, So I think I'm gonna have to come up with some requests, both of his originals and maybe a cover or two. Try to get my requests in, but I'm pumping this out to some people too, trying to build up the audience, if you will, because I think it's a really, really neat idea, and something that's obviously for a really good cause too.
Yeah, it should be fun, man. And I'm hoping we can maybe get a Hootie and the Blowfish song in there as well. I know that he and the guys from Hootie, are tight, and he's actually toured with them before. So I know Gamecock Nation loves some Hootie and the Blowfish as well. Of course, we're gonna get the Big Old Cock song, which is is his most famous song, I think, in Gamecock Nation. So yeah, man, it should be fun. It should be a good time for all. And we'll and like I said, if you want to go, if you go to stageit.com and search for Patrick, if you go to the Gamecock Central front page, you can get the link on there. If our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook, you're not going to be able to miss it. It's going to be everywhere. It's pay what you can. $10 is like the little suggested donation, but You, from what I was told, you should be able to get in for less than that, and obviously more than that if you want to, add a little bit more to go to Coach Muschamp in that group. And I believe that there's also a tip jar on there, because I want to say this is important to say. Patrick is doing this for free, so he's not making any money on his end of this, and we're not making any money on our end of this either right now. So if you want to just throw him a little bit of a tip for giving his time, there is a way for you to separately tip jar him there. And if you want your song played, I got a good feeling that a good way to get your request played, maybe slip a tip to Patrick there, and he'll probably knock that out. So cool, man. We're looking forward to it. Hope everybody else will join us. Chris, did we hit everything, man? I think we're out of time, and I think we hit everything we can hit for now.
Yep, I think you're right. I think we're good, man. That's fun.
All right, man. We appreciate everybody joining us here. We're all in this together, so we're going to keep trying to knock these out every week. Again, I'm going to try to get it on Facebook at some point so we can hit some different platforms. But for now, we'll keep doing them on Zoom and on YouTube Live. So for Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. Get all your Gamecock coverage and your concerts on GamecockCentral.com.